Good morning. Today is the 13th day of Tammuz, the 2nd of July, and we're starting a new parsha, Parashat Pinchas. And first of all, if you don't know, then Pinchas is Phineas in English. That's how they say it. I didn't know that for a long time, but I guess that's the English pronunciation. Who was Pinchas? So Pinchas was a grandson of Aaron the high priest, but if you read Rashi, then he says that he was not a priest until then, which is very interesting. How could he not be a priest if he's a grandson of Aaron the high priest? So the answer is that when the priests were anointed on the first day of the inauguration of the temple, of the tabernacle, God commanded Moses to anoint Aaron and his 4 sons. Anybody who was a descendant of Aaron but was older than 13 years old and was not commanded to have been anointed was therefore not a priest. And Pinchas was he was an adult already. He was over 13. So he was not anointed. And so it turns out that he was not a priest. But this is somewhat troubling. Why is this somewhat troubling? First of all, let's look at the Rashi, how this actually works. Rashi says like this. Where does he say this? Here, in verse 3. So we're looking at, 13. Numbers 25:13. Brit Ku'unat Olam. And he says like this. It's an eternal, what's called here, how do you say Brit Ku'unat Olam? Let's see. An eternal covenant of priesthood. So why does it receive this eternal covenant of priesthood? Because the priesthood had already been given to the offspring of Aaron. But it was only given to Aaron and his sons who had been anointed with him, and to their descendants who would be born after they were anointed. But Pinchas, I said before he was an adult, was born before then, before they were anointed, therefore he was not anointed. And therefore he did not become a priest until now. Now this is troubling, because is this the way to become a priest? What kind of a priest is this? Right away, when you read the story to the modern reader, this is something of an issue. How could it be that after he performed an act of zealotry, that's how he became the priest? And it's exactly what it says. Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron the priest, diverted my anger from the Israelites by zealously avenging me among them. Because of him I did not destroy the Israelites by plague because of my zeal. So it's actually, if you read the verse carefully, it's not that Pinchas was a zealot, he was actually an anti-zealot. He was actually diverting God's anger at what had happened. And so in that sense, he is doing something that is peaceful. He's encouraging the peace between, or the understanding between the Jewish people and God. But that still doesn't sit so well. So it's very interesting that this is not the only opinion. In the Talmud, there are 2, even 3 different opinions about how Pinchas became a priest. And I'm going to read to you from Zvachim, which is a tractate that deals with many of the sacrifices. And here there's a dispute about how did Pinchas become a priest. So let's see this. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon also stated, alternatively, wasn't Pinchas son of Elazar the priest with them? He's talking here about Aaron and Moses, or Aaron and his 2 sons, who had lost the other two sons and were now in mourning. So he says, why wasn't Pinchas also commanded to be in mourning? So the answer is, he was not an acute mourner, because it's not directly his brothers or his son. He's once removed, because he's already a grandson. The Gemara, the Talmud comments, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon say well to Rabbi Nehemiah like this. The Gemara explains, he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. As Rabbi Elazar says, that Rabbi Chanina says, Pinchas did not become a priest until he killed Zimri. So we find out that this is an opinion. Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Chanina. He's the one who thinks that this was done through this act of zealotry when he killed Zimri in the last reading of last week's Parsha. But right away we hear Rav Ashi said Pinchas did not become a priest until he made peace among the tribes. What is this talking about? Because at the time of the conquest of the land of Israel, when the tribes east of the Jordan River, Reuben and Gad and half of Manasseh, they took their inheritance of land east of the Jordan River, and when they had finished conquering, and it was time for them to go back to east of the Jordan, like they had promised. They promised that they would go with their brethren to see the conquest through. But when the time came that they were able to return home, they made an altar on the Jordan River. What did the Israelites on the west side of the Jordan understand? That they were building their own tabernacle, that they were making their own altar. We talked about this, that in ancient times, to have an altar was to have importance, was to show that you had a special relationship with God as opposed to someone else. You could invite the people, your friends, to your altar and not to someone and not others. So they understood that these tribes were now contesting the tabernacle that they had made in Gilgal for the first 14 years of the conquest, and that they later moved to Shiloh. And so they wanted to start a civil war. That was the first time that the thread that connected the Israelites together was unwinding. And so what did Pinchas do? So Pinchas went and he convened all the heads of the tribes, and he made the tribes, the 2.5 tribes on the east side of the Jordan, swear that that was not their purpose. Their only purpose was, and it is a little strange that they created an altar for it, their only purpose was to say that we are somehow connected to the tribes on the east side, on the west side of the Jordan. And so it wasn't that simple, because you don't make an altar to show that you belong. What would you make? Maybe you would make like a large whole tail. Like there were many steels like this that were done in the ancient world, that people told the story of how things happened, and they engraved it in stone in order to ensure that coming generations would know about this. So Pinchas had to do a little bit of diplomacy there. It wasn't that simple, but eventually he was able to make peace. And so actually that was, according to Rav Ashi, that was when he became a priest. As it is stated, and Pinchas the priest and the princes of the congregation, meaning the kings of the tribes, and the heads of the thousands of Israel that were with him, heard the words that the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the children of Manasseh spoke, and it pleased them well. And that happens in Joshua 22:30. So there's an idea here that Pinchas is not just making peace between the Jewish people and God, which again is a little hard to understand at first, but he is a peacemaker. There is something about him that makes peace. And this fits well with the picture of what a priest is supposed to do. The main purpose of a priest is to mediate between God and man, not in the sense that you pray to the priest and the priest brings the prayer to God, but rather in this case to ensure, let's say there's somebody who's coming and bringing a peace offering, or he's bringing a burnt offering, and he has to confess his sins on it. And people have a difficult time with that. It's not so easy for them. A lot of times, a person is holding back because he feels that it's difficult for him to let go. It's difficult for him to make peace with God. So really what the priest was supposed to do is exactly that. He was supposed to talk to the person, convince them, open them up, have them pour their heart out, and bring the peace that was so much needed between man and God. And so this was the essence of what Pinchas had done. There's another understanding, which is even more difficult to understand. It's not here in the Talmud here, it's in a different place. And it says that Pinchas was actually a priest from the beginning. And this whole thing that because he was already born and he wasn't anointed is not true. He was anointed. So what's so special about what he did now? So again, there it goes back to the idea that whether it was now or whether it was later, after they entered the land 14 years later, in either case, he had a special need to show that he had the priestly qualities, whereas the others who were anointed did not need that. They were anointed at God's command. But there is such a thing that a person rises to the occasion. So even though he was a priest in potential, he had to do some kind of act that would show the potential had become actualized. And so therefore that was this idea. Where we have to end, but I'll just say one word. Where do we take all of this? So the fact that Pinchas is a whole parsha, a whole portion of the Torah, is telling us that really, even when you are anointed, even when you have something from birth, you have something innate within you, your life is not going to work out just by itself with this innate ability just coming out. At times, and probably by every person's life, there are these moments when you have to make a stand, when you have to decide that you are going to bring out those innate qualities that you have. And when you have it, it becomes an eternal covenant. So even though it's innate within you, the action is needed to bring out the eternity, the covenant between you and God, to make this a lasting quality in your life. So thank you very much for joining, and I'll see you tomorrow. I'm sorry I have to leave. I'm giving let me just close the recording.